So, our passage today is found in Mark chapter 9, and we are picking up where we left off last week. And we're going to do verses 14 down through verse 29. And so, the flow of the text is moving away from the glorious transfiguration of Jesus now into quite a kerfuffle with his disciples and some teachers of the law. And so geographically, it's moving from the top of a mountain where Jesus was with Peter, James, and John and giving them the exhibition of his transfiguration. And now they've come down the mountain, and awaiting them is this chaotic scene of arguing, and we're going to find out in the text what it's all about. Okay, so from there, what's going to happen is Jesus is going to heal a demon possessed boy. He's going to help a father who is stuck in unbelief, you might say. And he's then going to teach his disciples that there are different species of demons, and some of them you can't command to come out, not even in the name of Jesus. They only come out by prayer, which means that only by the direct personal power and action of God can a demon like that come out. So we're going to move through this text under four headings. The first one is going to be the dispute. The second one is going to be the desperation. And the third one is going to be the deliverance. And the fourth one is going to be the difficult demon. Okay, so those are the four headings. First thing we're going to look at is the dispute. Now, look with me, if you will, at verses 14 through 19. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. And a man in the crowd answered. He said, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and he becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "O unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So Jesus, Peter, James, and John, they all get to the bottom of the mountain. They arrive upon a scene that is chaotic and contentious, a lot of arguing, almost I wouldn't say quite like a mob, but it's got that about to break out sort of feel to it. Now, it was the other nine disciples. Remember, out of the 12, three of them went up the mountain with Jesus. So the other nine disciples, that had like your Matthew and your Bartholomew, had Judas and the other Judas, Thomas, and all those guys were still at the bottom of the mountain while Jesus went up the mountain with Peter, James, and John. And these nine ended up getting into an argument with teachers of the law, and around them was this very large crowd of Jews. So what was the argument all about? What was it that everybody was disputing about? Or what was the dispute that the disciples had with the teachers of the law? Here's what I think I can draw from the text that helps us see what was this dispute about. And it had to do with the father. It had to do with the demon possessed boy. Obviously, okay, the disciples were not able to drive this demon out. Now you got to think about something here a minute, okay? This would have been embarrassing for those nine disciples, and several layers of embarrassment, okay? So number one, they got left behind, and they did not get to go up the mountain with Jesus. So already they're feeling left out. They've got bruised egos. They're feeling insecure. They're feeling maybe even like they're somehow second class apostles, and they're not really first stringers with Peter, James, and John. So there's already that going on. Well, then maybe they get a chance to prove their mettle and really try and come through in a big way. So this guy comes up with his son who's demon possessed, and they're gonna go and try and drive the demon out of this boy, and they fail. Okay, so now here they fail. They fail in front of this large crowd. They fail in front of the teachers of the law, and so they've got an audience who's got a front row seat to their failure. So now you just added another layer of embarrassment, another layer of insecurity, and the disciples are in a dispute with the teachers of the law. You can imagine the teachers of the law really capitalizing on their failure and kind of pointing it out like, you couldn't even drive out this demon. You're supposedly these special disciples of your rabbi, and how come you don't have the power to drive this demon out? Well, it's also likely that they would have been criticizing Jesus himself. Hey, if your rabbi really was all powerful, you would have the power to drive out these demons in his name. But obviously, your rabbi must not really be all that great or all that powerful. He must not be from God. So you can imagine the criticism that was being leveled against these disciples when they failed. Obviously, too, there was a personal touch here because they wanted to help, most certainly, and yet they were just as helpless as the father was in this situation. Now, I'm going to add one more layer to this, and that is, if you remember, in the Gospel of Luke, it says that they returned back from that first mission as apostles, and they were elated when they got back to Jesus, and they said to him, "Even the demons obey us," and they were just in awe about this power that they had. And then all of a sudden they fall flat on their face and they're totally impotent to help this boy as he's just gripped by the power of this demon. And so it's a very gripping scene. It's a very graphic scene, and a lot of contention here. So now here's the thing. What do guys do when they feel weak, humiliated, and insecure and criticized? They get angry and they start to try and defend themselves. And so you can imagine these 9 disciples, hearing from the teachers of the law, "Oh, you guys are a bunch of weaklings." They would have probably responded back, "Well, we don't see you guys doing anything for the boy. We can't help him. You obviously can't help him either, so you're no better." And pretty soon everybody's arguing over how to drive out demons, who really has power to do it, who God really is with, in exorcising demons. Probably would have started trading insults, and it would have just devolved into quite a little Donnybrook right there at the base of the mountain. So there's where the situation is at, and that's where Jesus and the other 3 apostles walk in, and this is the scene, okay, that is quite chaotic. So now, what happens here? Jesus asks, "What are you arguing about?" And the father of the boy comes up to Jesus and he begins to explain what the situation is. He says, "My son, he's been taken over by this demon. He's possessed by this demon, and this demon is just ruining him. My son can't speak anymore. He's a mute. He's deaf. He can't hear anymore. He's thrown into these fits where he seizes up and he rolls around on the ground and he foams at the mouth." It says even that the demon has taken the boy and made the boy throw himself into water to drown him. When there's fire, the demon makes the boy throw himself into the fire to try and burn him. And so, all this is going on, and this father is coming to Jesus, and I can't imagine where this father is at. I'm a dad of 5 kids, and on some level, I can imagine, but I can't really imagine and put myself in his place how desperate he feels at this point. And so the disciples are unable to do anything. The teachers of the law are not unable to do anything. This father is unable to do anything for his boy. And what does he do? The father, notice what he says: "I brought my son to you, Jesus." Now, listen, you got to pause right there. This is yet again where the Gospels are showing us parents bringing their kids to Jesus. You had Jairus, the synagogue leader, who came to Jesus on behalf of his daughter. You had the Syrophoenician woman a couple chapters earlier who came to Jesus and who so impressively persisted with Jesus on behalf of her own daughter. And Jesus responded and healed her daughter. And now you have this father coming to Jesus on behalf of his son. Listen, parents, grandparents, do you feel this dad here? Don't stop going to Jesus for your kids. Keep bringing your kids to Jesus and don't stop till he gives you what you ask. Then Mark shows this unexpected response from Jesus. Normally we get compassion or patience or tenderness, and here, annoyance. Jesus really almost comes across as fed up. But I want you to think about this, though. Think about Jesus' situation. He just came down from this mountaintop experience, from the very presence of two glorified saints, Elijah and Moses, from the presence and affirmation and the hearing of his Father in heaven. And Jesus' own divine glory was kind of unveiled in that moment for his three disciples to see. And he had this glorious moment at the top of the mountain, and then he comes down into this mess. Back into the mess Jesus goes. He had a break from it going up the mountain to Jesus, or up to up to that glorious situation, and then he's got to come back down into this very grievous situation, and it's just really a picture of God coming down from heaven into the mess of this world. And you know what? It's even more personal than that, because God comes down from his holy, majestic, splendid place as the sovereign God over all that he has created, and he comes down into our mess. He comes down, he came down from the mountain of his glory into the mess of humanity. What a picture we have right there of Jesus. And then what we see, though, so Jesus being annoyed, the question is, here's my question: why is he annoyed in this moment? I mean, I get it. He came from that experience on top of the mountain, now down to this, with messy people at the bottom of the mountain. I get that, but what specifically did Jesus find frustrating, or was he almost up to here with it? Was it because the work never ends? I don't think that was it. Was it because his disciples were unable to do exorcism and to cast this demon out? I don't think that was it either. Was it because his disciples got into a spat with these teachers of the law? I mean, is that the reason why Jesus is annoyed? Like, can you guys not argue all the time? I don't think that's it either. I think if you look at the text, Jesus tells us what it is that frustrates him. He says, "Oh, unbelieving generation. Oh, unbelieving generation." Here we come back to faith. It is only by faith, Hebrews chapter 11 says, that God is pleased. Without faith, it is impossible to please God, verse 6 says in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Ephesians chapter 2 says, we are saved not by works. God is pleased to save us when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. He is not pleased in the least to save us when we try to come to him through our works. Abraham, it says, was credited by God with righteousness because of faith, not because of his works, and that he somehow merited something before God. But God was pleased to say of Abraham, you are righteous, on the basis of Abraham's faith in God when God spoke to him. We look in Luke, and in Luke, Jesus says, speaking of his return, he says, when the Son of Man returns to the earth, will he find faith? It's the thing he's looking for when he looks at us. He's looking for faith. Faith is the one thing that pleases God, and there is no substitute for faith that God is pleased with in the least. If you want to bring pleasure to the holy and sovereign God of the universe, then come to him with faith. Come to him with your confidence in his power and in his goodness and in his holiness and in his mercy and in his justice and in his faithfulness. Come to him in that way. It'll do no good with him to bring anything to him other than faith. Unbelief annoys God. Unbelief annoys God. And you know why? Let me just kind of take that one step further to help us see why unbelief is so offensive to God and annoys him so much. It's because unbelief treats God like he's somehow less than what he really is. I want to give you an illustration of that, actually. If you will turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 18, or excuse me, 1 Kings chapter 20. There's this fantastic scene, okay, where the most evil king in Israel's history, in the northern kingdom's history, was King Ahab. Yes, this is the King Ahab who was married to Jezebel. And King Ahab set out and went to battle against the king of Aram. And it says that Aram was taunting him, and God gave victory to Ahab, and so Aram retreated. And it says that over the winter, the king of Aram was going to kind of like refortify his forces, and he was going to build up his forces, and he was going to make another attack in the spring. And so the prophet told Ahab, he said, look, get yourself ready, okay, because he's coming back and he's going to try and beat you in round 2. Well, here's the key. God heard what the king of Aram and his advisors were saying about him. They were sitting there saying, well, we lost, but the God of the Israelites is a God of the hills, but he's not a God of the valleys. And the valleys is where we have to bring the battle so that we can beat the Israelites. Okay? There's a different God who holds power and who rules over the valleys. You see the idolatry there? This is what God says in 1 Kings chapter 20. He sends this message to Ahab in chapter 20 of 1 Kings, verse 28. The man of God, the prophet, came up and told the king of Israel, this is what the Lord says, because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and that he's not a God of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am the Lord. You see that? Unbelief, whether it's through ignorance, idolatry, impudence, whatever, is the source of somebody's unbelief. Unbelief always treats God as though he's less than what he really is, and this is why it annoys him. So let me say this, though, back to our text in Mark chapter 8. There are two kinds of unbelief, okay? Two kinds of unbelief. So on the one hand, there's unbelief in people who have no interest in God. They just write God off. They want to live their life without any regard for God, and they just don't want him to be a part of their life. They don't care about him. They're not impressed with him, and so they just want to do their thing. And they've rejected him as God and as God over their life. So that's one kind of unbelief. But there's another kind of unbelief, okay, and it's the one, okay, it's the kind of person who masks their unbelief with fake faith. Fake faith. They really don't have faith, but they are religious and they have the religious vocabulary down, they have the religious activities down, but in their hearts, they really don't believe. In essence, they are like this father who's coming to Jesus. They are coming to Jesus, they're coming around Jesus, but they've never really come in faith to Jesus. It's not faith in him that drives them to him. So what we see here is that the disciples are not the only ones who are in a dispute. In one sense, Jesus is in a dispute with this generation.